Welcome back to Club Geneva, where it's your podcast, your voice. I'm Shady, and tonight we're pulling you into the world where shadows have teeth and survival is more than just a word. It's a heartbeat. It's a scream in the dark. This isn't just a story. It's a glimpse into the truth that lurks behind cracked walls and dim lights. A place where history's horrors live on. Draped in faded uniforms and cruel smiles. What would you do if you found yourself there, alone, haunted, in a forgotten cell where survival means facing nightmares that claw their way from the past? Tonight's story will have you questioning what you think you know about fear and what you don't. So turn down the lights, lean in close, and hold your breath. Because sometimes the things that go bump in the night are real. And they might just be waiting for you. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting long shadows over the concrete floor of the holding cell. I sat on the cold, hard bench, my hands trembling as the chains around my wrists rattled with every slight movement. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I had only been out with my boys, walking home from school, when the cop car rolled up on us, silent at first, like a predator stalking its prey. I wasn't even surprised when they pulled me aside. I mean, it was routine by now. A black boy in a hoodie, in the wrong neighborhood. Same story, different day. But this time, it felt different. The way the officers looked at me, like I wasn't even human. It sent chills down my spine. Their eyes were hungry, cruel, like I was nothing but a piece of meat. I had heard stories, whispers around the block about kids getting picked up by the cops and never coming back. I never believed them until now. They threw me in this cage alone, in the back of some rundown station that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The brick walls were chipped, stained with something dark and old, something that smelled like rot. It felt less like a cell and more like a tomb. I couldn't shake the feeling that this place wasn't just a holding cell. It was something more sinister, something older. The officers, big men with faded uniforms, laughed and whispered to each other in the corner. One of them, a tall and thin man with a long scar down his face, looked me up and down like I was a cow at an auction. "You ever heard of Slave Catcher's Boy?" he asked. His voice low and slick like oil. I didn't respond. My throat was tight, my heart racing. Back in the day, he continued, pacing back and forth like he was enjoying the sound of his own voice. They used to hunt down runaways. They throw them in chains, drag them back. Sometimes, though, they wouldn't. I could feel their eyes on me. Feel their hatred, their disgust. The kind of disgust that comes from a place deeper than just skin color. It was historical, generational. Like I was just another body in a long line of bodies they had no problem discarding. They keep them in cells like this, the man with the scar continued. Make them think they were safe. But then, he stopped and leaned in close to the bars, his face inches from mine. I could smell his breath, foul and rotten, like decayed flesh. Then they'd eat him. I recoiled, my stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't just some sick joke. They were absolutely serious. Every part of me wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The officer tapped on the bars with his nightstick, making a metallic ring echo in the small dark room. "You see, boy, we keeping tradition alive, and you're lucky. Some say the meat tastes better when it's scared. It adds a little flavor." I swallowed hard, the bile rising in my throat. My body was frozen with fear, but my mind raced. Images flashed before my eyes of men in shackles, of slave catchers on horseback, of lynching trees, of the ghost of my ancestors whose bodies had been devoured by the same hunger for flesh and power. History, it seemed, wasn't just in textbooks. It lived in these walls. It breathed in the bloodstains that covered the floor, in the rusted chains that hung in the corners of the room. I thought of my mother, how she worked 2 jobs just keeping food on the table, how she always told me to stay out of trouble, to mind my business, to get home before dark. But here I was, trapped in a nightmare that was as old as this country itself. The door to the holding cell creaked open and 2 more officers walked in, carrying long, thin knives. They didn't look like cops anymore. They looked like hunters. One of them licked his lips, the other smiled, revealing yellow teeth that looked like they had been sharpening for this moment for years. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't let myself become another one of their victims, another black boy whose name would disappear into the cracks of history, forgotten and discarded. I had to fight. But how? The chains on my wrists were heavy, but not unbreakable. I looked around, my eyes scanning the room for anything I could use. There was nothing, just the cold, hard metal of the bars and rough concrete beneath my feet. "Don't worry," one of the officers said. "It'll be over quick." But I knew it wouldn't. This was a slow death. It was the same death that was given to my ancestors in the fields, in the boats, and in the streets. I gritted my teeth and made a decision. I wasn't going to die like this. Not like an animal. Not for them. With a surge of adrenaline, I yanked on the chains with all my might, feeling the metal bite into my skin, drawing blood. The pain was sharp, but it didn't matter. The officers laughed as they approached, their knives gleaming in the dim light. The officers' faces were pulsating as if it was something inside of their bodies that were begging to be set free. "Struggle all you want," one of them said in a demonic tone. "It just makes it more fun for us." However, the dreadful fear that embellished me to this point resulted in a surge of adrenaline. They underestimated the strength that comes from years of surviving in a world that wants to swallow you whole. With one final pull, my hand slipped partially through the cuff. The sweat and blood lubricated my hands, and finally my wrist was free. And in that moment, everything slowed down. I grabbed the chain and swung it as hard as I could, catching one of the officers across the face. He stumbled back, holding his cheek while hurling curse words. The other officer lunged at me, but I was faster. In his failed attempt to grab me, he dropped his knife. Now was my chance. I picked up the knife, and in an involuntary motion, I swung and connected. I couldn't tell where he was hit, but I heard him scream. He took 2 steps and then collapsed to the ground. But I didn't stop there. I couldn't stop. I fought like my life depended on it, because it did. The other officer was reaching for his service weapon, but I was faster. When it was over, I stood there, breathing hard, covered in their blood. The officers, the ones who had been watching, were gone. They had fled like cowards. I'm guessing they had not calculated how difficult it would be explaining how an injured minor managed to pull the plug on 2 officers who each had knives inside of their holding cells. I looked down at the 2 men lying on the ground. I listened to the cadence of their final sweet agonal breaths. See, they weren't invincible. They weren't gods. They were just men. Men who thought they could feast on the innocent. Men who thought that they could feast on a lamb, but not today. The fight wasn't over, and it wouldn't be, but tonight I had survived. We look forward to catching up with you next week. Have a great night.